we're going to make these drums a little bit more exciting, right? I want this to sound like a kit that was actually really like recorded well. It's a live kit. That's the intention that I have as a mixing engineer. I always want things to sound alive. I want them to sound dope, right? Like, who doesn't want stuff to sound dope? But with this kit especially, I want it to sound as acoustic as possible and as live as possible, just because I feel like it'll sell the emotion through a lot more on the record, you know, having heard the temp. And again, if you ever need to, just go up to the reference and reference what you're working on. I want to give it like some spitty edginess, right? Which, you know, I have this Maserati drum plugin on here, which is great. It's giving thump to the snare, giving some snap, and then some treble, and it's for the snare top. I think it sounds really good on the snare drum. And then I have on the kick drum, I have a little boost up here, which this looks like a big boost, but with this EQ, it's actually pretty small. It's not super crazy. This Massenburg, you know, it's based on like a GML kind of idea with an EQ. So I'm doing some 173 and some 55, which is really like punch and maybe some more kind of sub and feeling in the chest or in the gut, you know what I mean? And then I'm compressing a little bit with this quad VCA, which just gives it more punch. And then, of course, the Transient Master is giving it just a little bit more attack on the kick drum. So now the next thing I kind of want to do is I kind of want to build or blend in some samples. I want to blend in like samples of better acoustic kick that's going to be just a little bit fatter, just a little bit more spitty. So what I'm going to use here is I'm going to use Trigger. And this is what I do. I always start my mixes off by building the drums. The drums need to be the foundation. They need to be built right before you start putting vocals on them. It's like the foundation of the track, the foundation of your home, you know? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up the Slate Digital, let me see here, Steven Slate drums, Trigger, and we're going to go mono, remember, because this is a kick drum. And that's going to open up our Trigger plugin. And what this plugin does, if you're not familiar with it, it basically allows you to load up drum samples from anywhere. But they have a library of samples as well into these little slots. So you have different miking schemes. You can have a close mic, you can have a room mic, you can have a outside mic, etc. And I feel like the samples themselves were just like one mic. You know, it was like a sample. It was just very stagnant. So what I want to do is I want to give it maybe a couple mics. I want to kind of blend in a new kick drum that's going to sound a little bit like more real, basically. So go to the browser here, and we're going to go to our, you know, any of these kits. Like you can go SSD Platinum Kit preset, and then let's go to like, let's find something that's going to be kind of like punk rock-ish. And we'll go kick. And you just double click that. It's going to load up these mics. You can close out the browser and go back to triggering by clicking this button. And what you're going to get here is a blend of mics. And what it's going to do is it's going to give you a gate here that's going to show the kick drum. Like say if you recorded a drum kit and you had a bunch of bleed of like hi-hats and toms and everything else, you could actually gate those things out. And this is going to show us the sensitivity and the detail and all that. And we're going to dial that in, and I'll show you exactly what that looks like. We're going to just completely solo out this kick so you can really hear it. Okay, so that's if we're doing 100% of the sample. Now what I want to do is I kind of want to blend the sample in. So we're still getting that really tight punk rock kind of kick, but we're getting a little more dynamic of the sample going on. So let's try this out. And that's going to be this mix knob here. So I'm going to probably blend this back a little bit. The idea is to take this kick drum from sounding like he's literally kicking a box of cardboard into something that's punchy, right? So this sample for me is not really working. So we're going to go through some other samples. Let's find something like, here we go, Fat Radio Rock Kick. This could be cool. Go bam, and go back to triggering, and just blend down these mics, because these are going to be like the room mics, right? This is the close mic. This NRG means like it's the NRG Studios, like in the room mic, right? So I'm just going to blend these down. I want it to be more of a direct sound, and let's try this out. Okay, I like that. I think that's really cool. I want to probably like take the rooms down just a little bit more, but it also just kind of gives it more of a real kind of feel to me. So let's hear the kit with that going on. Much better, right? And that's literally like, I'm not going and doing a bunch of crazy EQ or anything, but that kick drum before just sounds like gate, gate, gate. It sounds like someone's literally just hitting a paper box or like a cardboard box. It just doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound like a drum to me, right? And I grew up with drums. I grew up playing drums as the first instrument that I really fell in love with. It also kind of sets it back in the mix, which I really love, right? It'll give more room for things. It gives space for things. It goes, hey, this is the space we're in. This is the studio we're in, right? If it's NRG, it's NRG, right? Nothing wrong with that. So now let's do the same thing with the snare here. Just option dragging the trigger up. And I'm going to go to the same kit. So we're going to go back to the browser. And we're going to go to the SSD Platinum kit presets. And I think we had like the Fat Radio Rock Kick, which I think is great. And we'll double click and it'll open the snare drums. Go back to the triggering and we'll bring the snare drum back. We may not like this on the snare. I don't know. But you got to try stuff. It's, you know, a lot of this is about experimentation. And then we're going to mix this in. Let's check it out. I love it. I think it sounds great. There's some pitch variations, but I think just hearing the snare in the room kind of like takes care of that for me personally. So, and you're not going to know until you actually play it against like the bass and the key of the song and all that stuff. So for now, this sounds really, really good to me. I mean, I think we've made a vast improvement, and I'll just A-B it without the trigger and with the trigger for the kick and the snare. Like, it still has that snap and that punch that the initial sample had, but now it just kind of sounds more like a kit in a room. I mean, that's really what I'm going for, right? And that's kind of like how I would do this before I go and like, I'm going to slam it with a bunch of compression and do a bunch of saturation stuff, because you don't want to waste your time saturating a sample that's just not right. Like, sometimes the sample's just not it, right? So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw this bass up just to see kind of like where that's sitting with the bass, because that is literally the next thing I would think about is the bass and how it's going to sound with these drums and how we can tighten that up in that sound. And I'm just going to bring the bass track up here so we can really solo it out and just check it out with the bass. So unmute the bass, solo it up, and make sure that the bass is also going through the right buses. So we're just going to route this guy. We're going to say to all instruments or instrument mix, as the bass is an instrument. Pretty obvious, right? And this is a stereo bass, which is weird for me, so I might sum it to mono, but if it sounds like it's mono already, fine. So let's check it out and let's pop it in. All right, so what I'm noticing is with the bass, the snare actually starts to sound kind of thin, right? So it's really interesting how mixing works. It's like you start doing something and then like something else sounds different when you put this thing in or take that thing out. So let's see how we can thicken out the snare a little bit. We do have a parallel compressor that we're sending to, and it looks like we're also doing the room. I'm going to take this room back just a little bit because we are getting some of the room from the trigger as well. And let's see if we can thicken up this snare drum. We might throw an API on it. We might just need to tweak some things on this snare bus. So let's check it out. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm kind of taking down that that 2K area. It's kind of just a little bit harsh for me, and it's just like really kind of annoying almost. And this is kind of like getting a little boxy in this like 700 area, right? So for me, that's like boxiness in the snare drum. Now I'm going to follow this Pro Q. Oh, and I also swept out all the garbage down here and then gave it a little sparkle at the top because I like the spit to hear the strings, the actual snare, the wires under the snare, right? That's what I really want to hear. The next thing I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to throw an API on here. Just, you know, API EQ 550 is great. Like the 550B is incredible. 550A is going to be a little bit different, but 550B is really what I love using on, you know, to fatten up snare drums. So here I'm going to take this to bell on the low frequency, and I know I probably want to be in the 100 to 200 area. Okay, so I'm just going to boost that up, and let's listen. Now you see why we put that spit on the top is because once you start boosting the bottom and that thud, it actually starts to take away from the top, right? That's just the way it works. That's why it's mixing, right? You do something to something, it's going to change something else. It's just the way it works. If you bring up more 100, you're going to perceive a lot less of the top end. Okay, something to take note on. Another thing, I don't like 100 on this. I'd like to go maybe on this in-between in this mid-frequency, mid-low stuff. So I'm going to go one band up, and I'm going to go to the 150 area, or even 180. We'll just check that out. And I like to pin things out a little bit, just to really recognize what I'm doing here. See how that just gives it a little bit more girth? Like it's just like it's heavier. You know what I mean? That's really what I'm looking for here. So I'm not looking to do anything else besides just kind of thicken it out a little bit. Okay. So I'll A/B that for you. Okay, and then this is the thing I want to really stress to you is that when you start to EQ after the trigger, you're EQing those drums together, right? The sample and the other one, right? So what I actually want to do here is I want to take the Maserati drum here and just try it after the samples, rather than blending in a sample after I've compressed or EQ'd. Like if you EQ and compress before, you're compressing and EQing the original sample and sound, and then you're blending in the sample of the trigger. But what if we affect the whole thing after everything, right? After the sample is introduced. That's always what I'm thinking, like move the order of your plugins around and just check them out. Okay, that's what we're doing. And I do not like it as much. I actually think that it takes away from it, thins it out, doesn't have as much impact. So I'm going to change that back, and I'm actually going to give this just a little more thump and snap here. And then we're going to bring the output up just a little bit. Okay, so that's starting to really sound good to me. Another thing I want to do on the drum mix bus, I want to go in there and I want to throw on so it's got the API on here, right? But I want to have like a little bit more spit and a little bit more edge on the whole drum mix. And we might even, further down the line, we might have a different drum mix bus for the hip hop drums, okay? Just because they may need to be treated differently. But for now, my idea is to give it a little bit more of an edgy compressor, and then give it a little bit more of a distortion or like tape saturation, tube saturation, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter, but I think that that's really going to serve us well. So the API is just not doing it for me. I feel like it's fat and it's like cool and punchy and stuff, but I think it needs to be a little bit more edgy, just for my taste, and this track, and it being more like a pop punk kind of thing. I just want the drums to be spitty, So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a distressor on there. And this is just something I think like maybe one of the most world famous drum compressors. Like, hey, quote me on it if you want. I really think it's probably true. This is probably the most celebrated drum compressor in the world. I think most studios have a pair of these, a stereo pair everywhere you go. Okay, so here, Joe Ciccarelli is an amazing drum producer. I think he's an amazing engineer. So I'm going to use him or Vance Powell as a good example of drums, right? So we're going to go to, they have snare drum crack. I got a bass drum. I got basic electric. I got drum overhead squish. That's good. Vance Powell has rock kick snare, indie rock kick and snare. What we're really looking for is like a bus. So Jack Joaquin is awesome at rock mixing as well. Has great drum sounds. So I think this would be a good one too. So you got like a drum parallel bus. This is great. So we can grab that and we could see that there's no parallel mix in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to treat it like a parallel right on the mix bus, and we're going to blend it in. Hopefully that makes sense. So we're not sending this to this distressor. We're taking all the drums through the drum mix, and then I'm blending this in and treating it like a parallel compressor. So we're going to stay true to what he meant to do with this preset. Okay, so I think that's at a really good spot. It's starting to sound a lot more rock and roll. Starting to sound a lot more punk rock. Starting to sound a lot more edgy, a little thicker, a little more aggressive. You're bringing up the low-level information. I like it. I think it sounds really, really good. The next thing I'm going to do, though, because I know what the distressor does, it's going to bring in harmonics. I'm just going to start to clean up a little bit of that harmonic stuff. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of getting more of that boxiness and the harmonics that it's kind of spitting out in that mid area that's just kind of congesting stuff. And then I'm going to kind of search around here as well and just see if there's any sort of, voltage that I can kind of like get rid of, right? And I might even push a little bit of the 1K area, just the mid-range. Just a little cleaning up, it's very simple. Like we're just shaping after we process, after we give a little distortion, a little elements to it, right? And now the last thing I want to try on this, don't know if this is going to work or not. Don't promise that it will work or not, but I want to try just giving it a little bit of a little bit of secret sauce on it, I want to put some secret sauce on it. I don't know where that's coming from, but hey, you got to get the secret sauce on there. So I'm going to use, let me see, the Black Box HG2. Some good thickening. I want to saturate just a little tiny bit in the flat mode, or you could do the highs or the lows. The highs is going to distort kind of more of the highs. I'll show you. Here we go. So there's a note in the rides that I'm really not liking. It's got that like, it just sounds really weird to me. So I'm going to go in here and kind of try to get rid of that. I also think it's really important with the ride cymbal that we don't let it take up too much mid-range, because you're going to have vocals there, right? So I'm just going to take that and I'm going to copy it down to both rides, and that should be cool. Now remember, we have our groups on, so to suspend them, we need to Command-Shift-G. And we need to suspend our groups so that we can mess around with these drums individually. I just wanted to bring the rides down just a couple, maybe a dB and a half, right? So let's make sure we take those guys down. And I noticed they are playing like a melody, kind of ba 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 ba. So it's probably like, intentional, but that's about it right there for the drums for now, okay? So I think I got these rock drums in a really good spot. And I think the bass is really where we need to go next. And then once we dial in this bass, I'll start to bring in the rock vocals. And we'll start to place those rock vocals on top of a really, strong foundation of drum and bass.